Start by removing the two saddle bolts and barrel nuts. Remove the valve cap. Use parallel jaw wrench pliers to hold the lower cradle. An adjustable wrench or open-end wrench may be used, but may leave marks on the flats of the cradle. Use the triple square socket and a 3/8 inch breaker bar to loosen and remove the lock ring. Remove the lower cradle assembly from the stanchion. Slide the stanchion down, being careful not to lose the upper O-ring on the rod end cap. Hold the top of the piston rod with a 7mm open-end wrench. Use a 13mm cone wrench to loosen and remove the rod end cap. Use internal snap ring pliers to remove the retaining ring at the bottom of the post. Use a pick to unseat and remove the plastic air filter retainer. Reinstall the valve cap on the end of the piston rod. Push the valve cap against the bench surface to unseat the cartridge from the housing. Remove the valve cap and slide the cartridge out of the housing. Attach the shock pump to the end of the piston rod. Use the bleeder valve to slowly release pressure from the cartridge. Some oil loss during pressure release is normal. Keep a towel over the bleeder to catch any lost fluid. Manually actuate the valve at the bottom of the post to equalize the cylinder and reservoir pressures. Bleed remaining pressure from the cartridge using the shock pump. Repeat this step if necessary until the actuator valve remains open. This ensures that there is no remaining pressure contained in the cartridge. Hold the lower cylinder cap using parallel jaw wrench pliers. Use a 13mm open-end wrench to crack the upper cylinder cap loose a half turn. Use a vise fitted with soft jaws to hold the cartridge vertically. Lightly clamp on the flat faces of the actuator. Do not clamp anywhere on the reservoir tube. Unthread the upper cylinder cap while holding the reservoir tube down. This is to prevent the reservoir from unseating and spilling fluid. Slide the piston rod assembly out of the cylinder and set aside on a clean surface. Remove the cartridge from the soft jaws of the vise. Pour the fluid out of the cartridge into a graduated cylinder. Inspect the fluid. Fluid should be clear or yellowish in tint and free of any visible particulates. Discard the fluid if discolored or contaminated. Top off the fluid to the correct volume to replace any loss during depressurization. Note that the required fluid volume is not affected by added spacers. Place the cartridge back into the soft jaws of the vise. Pour the measured fluid into the cartridge. Partially insert the piston and rod assembly. Clip the desired number of travel spacers onto the piston rod below the cylinder cap. Slide the upper cylinder cap down and thread onto the cylinder, but do not tighten it yet. Remove the cartridge from the soft jaws. Hold the cartridge by the lower cap assembly using wrench pliers. Use a 13mm open-end wrench to tighten the upper cylinder cap. Attach the shock pump to the end of the piston rod. Inflate the cartridge to 250 psi. Manually actuate the valve at the bottom of the cartridge to ensure the cartridge is fully extended. Top off the pressure if necessary to bring it back to 250 psi. Remove the shock pump and clean the cartridge of any residual oil or grease using isopropyl alcohol and a clean towel. Insert the cartridge through the bottom of the housing. Push firmly on the actuator to seat the cartridge into place. Install the plastic air filter retainer. Use a pick or small screwdriver to ensure that the retainer is fully seated into place. Make sure that the ends of the retainer do not overlap. Use internal snap ring pliers to install the retaining ring. Make sure that the retaining ring is fully seated into its groove. Thread the rod end cap assembly onto the piston rod. Use a 7mm open end wrench and a 13mm cone wrench to tighten. Slide the stanchion up until the rod end cap is seated. Place the top O-ring into position on the rod end cap. Place the lower cradle assembly onto the top of the stanchion. Note the laser marked R on the right saddle pivot block indicating the correct orientation. Lightly grease the threads of the lock ring. Install the lock ring to secure the lower cradle. Tightly grip the two flats of the lower cradle using wrench pliers. Use a 3/8 drive torque wrench and the Wolf Tooth triple square socket to tighten the lock ring to the specified torque. Reinstall the air cap, upper cradle, and two saddle bolts and barrel nuts. Perform a bench test by manually opening the valve and fully compressing the post, holding the post in a vertical orientation. Wait a few seconds and manually actuate the valve to extend the post. Push on the top of the post to check for any squish. If any squish is felt, repeat this step. The post will automatically bleed any air out of the cylinder when it is fully compressed, as long as it is in an upright position. Clean any residual grease or oil using isopropyl alcohol and a clean towel.